Why, hello, faithful viewer. Welcome to this little space in the internet, however it is that you got here, whether completely randomly and by chance, or whether you were intentionally seeking out the next part in this conversation. I bid you welcome. This is meant to be a safe corner of the internet where we can consider God, contemplate God, and discuss God, particularly from the Bible and from the tradition that I happen to be in. If you have been a part of these conversations up to this point, we have talked about how God is good and God has made all things good. And yet the next obvious question then is, well, what's wrong then? Because not all things in the world are good in our present way that we experience them. And this is where I would like to pick up the conversation, to take the next bite in this theological course that we have been slowly chewing upon, video by video. And I want to go back to the garden and to learn the story that the Bible gives us and how the garden explains a lot about the world as we presently know it. So in Genesis chapter 2, we read a story that God has planted a garden, that he has put the first human beings in that garden, and he has planted two special trees in the center of the garden, and he has told humankind, you can eat of any tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you must not eat, because in the day that you eat of it, you will die. This idea of sort of being a hired hand in a garden certainly would not be foreign to ancient people, especially in an agrarian society. Lots of vineyards in the Middle East and hired day laborers. So it is completely natural to have the master, the owner of a particular garden, say, hey, while you guys are working, while you guys are out here, you can certainly eat. You deserve the fruit of your wages, but there are certain things that are off limits. According to the story, God has made one thing off limits. I want to pick up the story in chapter 3 then, and it says, now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which Yahweh God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die. For God knows that in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. And she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Now, there's an awful lot that you can read into that story, whatever you want to make of it. Certainly, over the centuries, the church and those people outside of the church have interpreted this story in a variety of ways. What I'm interested in for our purposes is there is a problem of sin. And I'm purposely going to say a problem of sin and not necessarily what we would typically say, which is the problem of evil. We have to somehow explain all of that which is wrong in our world. I think we have to start actually with sin, which, even though that word doesn't appear in this story, we get a good idea of what its meaning is. For God, as the owner of the garden, the planter of the garden, the owner of all of the fruit therein, to give permission to his people, very much like a vineyard owner would give to the hired servants. You can have anything except for this one thing, and for them to choose that one thing creates a problem. It creates a rift with the owner of the vineyard, or in our case, it creates a rift between the creation and the creator. But I want you to notice that sin is directly tied to this issue of temptation. And temptation, at least in this story, didn't start within the human beings, within the man and the woman. They didn't go, you know what, I just see that tree and every day I have this nagging feeling like I should eat from it. No, one of the creatures in the garden posits an idea into their thinking that this good God isn't as good as they think he is. And therefore, they have every right to question the rules that have been given to them. And once temptation starts on the outside, then it sort of takes root on the inside. And of course, by the conclusion of this story, we have people at odds with their creator. I think it's also fair to say that if nothing else, this story helps explain why we see or we notice this desire to disobey authority at almost every level of our lives, whether it's children to parents, whether it's employees to their employer, whether it's citizens to their government. And again, I'm not saying blind obedience is a good solution in each and every situation. I'm just saying, I think most of us recognize there's this innate quality in us that sometimes doesn't want to do what we know we should do or what we've been taught to do. In this story, that certainly identifies this impulse of sin, which is closely tied to temptation. We get tempted and we don't always make good decisions. Now, there are some traditions that would argue this is original sin, and this caused every other sin to happen further on down the line. I think you could read this story that way. I think you could also read this story as if it is an explanation of God's plan and his will as it's revealed, and this warped nature that we have, or this warped inclination. Why everything is warped. Not that, if the first man and the first woman wouldn't have eaten of the forbidden tree, somehow we would be in this sinless state now. I think that perhaps it's a way to say, we're going to get there one way or another, because we all feel that. There's something about the freedom of choice and our struggle and even our proneness to temptation that makes this sort of thing almost inevitable. Another way to recognize this in the world around us is to read Ecclesiastes as a whole, all 12 chapters, but I just want to read a section from the end of chapter 1 where it says, I, the teacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. And I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I think that poem, that idea, is innately visible to all, that something is bent. Something is bent in the cosmos. Something is bent within us, and we don't know how to explain it except dissatisfaction, vanity, chasing after wind. The author of Ecclesiastes portrays it as if God has set us at grievous tasks. But again, if you read the Genesis account, it's for some reason we choose to make things grievous. Perhaps that Genesis account just reveals what is already bent, and it complicates our problem even worse. The last thing I want to share with us as we consider this problem of sin comes from Romans, where the apostle says, through one man, sin entered into the world, and death through sin. And so death spread to all humankind because all sinned. I think there is something interesting in there. Obviously, there is something about death. We're not going to get into that in this particular video. But this idea that it wasn't just the one man, the first human sinning, that is the problem. The problem is that all sin. The first human just happened to be the first one to do it. But don't trick yourself into thinking that somehow if you would have been the first human, you wouldn't have done it. I think we see by our sin that we all do it. We're all prone to sin. We're all bent towards disobedience. And when we are disobedient to the goodness of creation and to the goodness of our Creator, it creates a problem. It manifests itself in all of the problems that we see around us. Now, in one sense, that can seem overly simplistic, perhaps. In another sense, that can be very dense and heavy, and I recognize that. Maybe you're going to need some time to just chew on that for a little bit. But if you find that you can say, you know what, I agree with this idea, that there's an awful lot wrong all around me, and there's an awful lot wrong even within me. I don't deny that. Therefore, what does it mean? What comes after the problem of sin and our susceptibility to temptation? What are the logical consequences that flow from that? If you can get to that place, then maybe, just maybe, you will be ready for the next bite in this feast that we call theology. Until then, I hope that you remain well And I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon back on this screen.